Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. The hothead woolly bugger has all the fish-catching capabilities of a standard woolly bugger, plus a bright orange bead to really grab a fish's attention and help the fly sink fast. To start, get hold of the size 8 streamer hook. Insert the point of the hook into the small hole on one of the bright orange beads and work the bead around up to behind the hook eye. Then, get the assembly firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. Pick up the coil of solder wire. It's the slightly darker and thicker one. While holding one end of the wire with the fingertips of your left hand, take 10 or so touching wraps up the hook shank with the wire. Then, helicopter the wire to break the excess off close. Leave some space between the wire wraps and the bead. Using just the smallest amount of superglue, apply a thin skim to the hook shank in front of the wire wraps and quickly slide the wraps forward up into the back of the bead and hold them there for a couple of seconds. This will help to stabilize the bead and will allow you to tuck in the tail of the wire wraps without them all simply spinning around the hook shank. Load a bobbin with the spool of black thread, then get the thread started on the hook shank immediately behind the wire. Take a few wraps rearward before snipping or breaking off the tag. Now, pick up the coil of smaller, lighter colored wire and snip an 8 to 10 inch piece free. This will be enough to make numerous flies. Lay the wire against the near side of the hook so it butts up against the wire wraps, then take touching thread wraps to secure it all the way back to the start of the bend. Select a single black marabou feather for the tail. Moistening the feather will make tie-in much easier. With the feather dampened, measure to form a tail a full hook in length, then transfer that measurement rearward to the start of the hook bend. Take wraps of tying thread forward, binding the marabou to the top of the hook shank all the way up to the wire wraps. Then, lift the butt end of the marabou up and snip the excess off close. Continue taking thread wraps forward, then back, to smooth the transition between the marabou and the wire wraps. Pull 2 strands of crystal flash free from the packet. Align the ends of the strands and hold them so they're pointing toward the rear of the fly. Align these ends with the tip of the marabou tail, then take wraps of tying thread to anchor the flash to the near side of the hook. You can then sweep the remaining material onto the far side of the hook and take thread wraps to secure it there. Continue taking thread wraps rearward, binding the flash to either side of the hook all the way back to the start of the bend. With the flash secured, snip the excess off to the length of the tail. Now, make open spiral wraps, advancing your tying thread up the hook shank to a little ways behind the bead. Snip a 10-inch length of black yarn free from the hank. This is enough to make numerous flies. Secure one end to the top of the hook shank right behind the bead and take open spiral wraps with your tying thread to bind it down to the top of the hook shank all the way to the base of the tail. You can then advance your thread forward to just behind the bead. Get hold of the yarn and start making touching wraps with it forward up the hook shank to create the body of the fly. When you reach your tying thread, use it to firmly secure the yarn, then snip the excess yarn off close. Pick up a single black hackle feather and pull down 4 or 5 fibers on both sides of the stem. Use your tying scissors to snip the fibers off into a small triangular tie-in anchor that kind of looks like a Christmas tree. With the shiny side of the feather facing you, place the tie-in anchor against the near side of the hook and take thread wraps to secure it. The trimmed barbules on the stem will help it to keep from pulling free. Get hold of the feather with your fingers or hackle pliers and take 2 wraps with it, one immediately behind the other. Then, begin taking open spiral wraps with the feather down the hook shank, finally ending at the base of the tail. Anywhere from 5 to 7 wraps looks good. Get hold of the wire you tied in earlier and start making open spiral wraps with it, first to anchor the hackle tip, then to effectively counterwrap the somewhat delicate hackle stem. Wiggle the wire back and forth as you go, doing your best to not trap hackle fibers. When you reach the bead, use your tying thread to firmly anchor the wire. You can then reach in with the tips of your tying scissors and carefully snip the excess tip of the hackle feather off at the base of the tail. At the head of the fly, sweep the hackle fibers rearward and take a few more thread wraps to make sure the wire rib is bound down really well. Then, you can helicopter the wire to break it off close, right at the back edge of the bead. Do a 4 or 5 turn whip finish to anchor your tying thread and snip or cut it free. A small drop of head cement applied to the thread wraps behind the bead will ensure they don't come unraveled and increase the durability of the fly. And that's the hothead woolly bugger. You can dead drift them, swing them, or strip them in. There basically isn't a wrong way to fish a bugger.